Emptiness is not some sort of background substance or source from within the manifestation arises. Like this distinction between manifestation and source collapses, and then there is just manifestation, but it is source. And it's not really manifesting because there's no actual arising. So you kind of go beyond existence and non-existence in a way, and it's just this very ordinary human experience in a
Welcome to the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds.
Hello, and welcome to the Endless Possibilities Podcast. My name is Garrett, and I'm your host today for another amazing conversation. On this show, we talk about everything to do with spiritual awakening, energy healing, consciousness, out of body experiences. And today I have a very special guest called Vivi. I'm going to give Vivi a little introduction. This is from her bio on her website. As long as I can remember, there was a longing for truth, although for a long time I did not know what I was yearning for. In my early 30s, in spring 2013, I then experienced a non-dual opening I later came to know as Kundalini Awakening. It gave me a direct taste of a radical different, undivided mode of being, which was at the same time deeply familiar. What followed was a thorough, dark night of the soul, during which the known identity, self, immolated. Eventually, I found myself in a paradoxical free fall. Reality woke up to itself. The terrific dream of I am vanished as if it had never happened. It was a death, a full awakening to true nature, an ecstatic mystery of living as unknown vastness. Okay, Vivi, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here today with me.
Thanks, Gareth. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So Vivi and I were both guests on Maggie G's podcast, Humanizing Awakening. And I think Maggie suggested the two of us have a conversation. So this is the outcome of Maggie's introduction. And yeah, we're going to talk about Vivi's journey today and the stages of awakening. So, Vivi, one thing I seem to notice, like common thread with people who have gone through a spiritual awakening, people seem to have a sort of a similar story. Something doesn't feel right as a child, or they don't seem to fit in. Was that similar for you, Vivi?
Yes, that's my story as well. It's a little bit, I guess, like being like an alien, in the world of human beings and in the social settings. And the further it goes, like when I was a child, I think like a really young child, that was fine. I have beautiful memories from those times. But I guess somewhere at the age of 9, 10, 11, it's hard to say. Then I can recall that something started to feel more and more uncomfortable and, contracted. And there started to be increasing some sort of self-consciousness, that would start to look inwards and kind of land into some sort of sense of not okayness. And yeah, this movement of, looking outside to other people for a validation, I guess. And that's the beginning of the journey of separation. And then it just goes deeper and deeper into a very uncomfortable and alienated state of being. And I think my understanding of it now is that at the center of it all, like at the center of this experience of being a person, being an individual, like moving in the world, moving in time, having dreams, having hopes, having fears, all of that at the center of it, there's just this, you could say, primal longing. And some people call it seeking energy, but that can sound negative. So I like to call it like primal longing. It's just this really, really pure kind of impulse, you could say existential will, that is somehow searching something. And then when at some point, if we get into spirituality, if we get into well, self-inquiry, non-duality, all of these, then we start to tap into this energy, and then we may start to call it aspiration. Like, hey, there is something in me that it's been kind of calling me my whole life. And as long as that energy is unconscious, it's kind of trying to, well, actualize itself by, well, achieving external conditions or looking for the fulfillment for that longing from external conditions or even internal conditions, like spiritual experiences, or kind of starting to maybe look into how could I experience myself internally in a way that is more fulfilling, but it doesn't really address the core of that longing. Okay, so the core of that longing, it's really when we start to tap into that, it's really this like, it's a desire to kind of return to this original state, which paradoxically is always already the case. So this is simply this unspeakable reality that where there is no subject, there's no object, okay, there's no division whatsoever, and it's always already the case. It's so immediate. It's more immediate than immediate because there's no time. It's just this pure immediacy, right? And somehow this experience of the person is kind of like a condensation or contraction, we could say, like within this original condition. Okay, and then when we enter a spiritual path of some sort, then that contraction can slowly start to unwind itself, and usually it happens layer by layer by layer by layer, and then it's
Yeah.
possible to kind of go all the way through with it, so that energy kind of completely comes into a sort of cessation, we could say, which is a type of death, I guess. And and then there is that which always has been, okay, and it's really hard to say even what it is. I just like to call it reality or suchness or what is, but because it's not objectifiable, it's never an object. It's, you cannot perceive it. There's no experiencer even. So it's not an experience, it's not a state, but it's just always the case, so to speak. And this reality is so creative that it can be anything it wants. Kind of, it can be a person, and it can have all these dreams, dream of separation, even dream of awakening, anything it wants, and it can be many things simultaneously that can appear even contradictory, but it never somehow ceases to be what it is. So this everything is always rooted in this original condition. Okay, that's the way I see it.
So to a young person, an adolescent, or a child, what are we missing, right? Because I remember it as being like I was craving for love as a child, like mother's love. And for some reason, I think it was my parents' generation. They weren't that lovey generation like that. I see the mothers of today are, right? And I always wanted that, and I didn't seem to get it with my own mother, right? And eh, I kind of felt like that I was missing out on something. But as I started later on going through my own awakening, it was like, oh, I am that love. That love is within me, right? That love that I was seeking from an external source is really what I was always looking for internally, right? It's always been there. And I think when you start to go through the awakening, you start to see that like, oh, I just exist as love, and I don't need to find it in the external. So when when you were sort of like growing up and having that feeling of not belonging or something missing, what was it? What was, did you know what you were lacking, or
At that time, no, I don't think it's possible to have that sort of self-awareness as when we are children.
hello? I hope you are enjoying the conversation with Vivi. This is just a quick request asking for your support. Subscribing to our channel helps to show the YouTube algorithm that we are a worthwhile channel, and they push us out to new audience. So if you want to keep watching great conversations like this one today, please, please, please hit subscribe. It goes a long way to helping us. Thank you so much. Back to the interview with Vivi. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
But
a good
something just doesn't
question.
feel right.
Like there's something about it with like being just loved for who you are that resonates. For me, what also comes up, when you ask this question is there was this sense of not being seen, like
Mm,
just not being seen for what I am. I had this sense that people around me, like especially adults, they would, well, I wouldn't be able to put it in words at that time, but they would kind of see me through their, well, mental filters or projections. So there wasn't really this type of meeting that I was longing, just like presence to presence, and where someone would really attune with kind of what I am, which is not a person actually. Okay. And to attune with another person in that way, it's you kind of have to just drop into beingness itself and connect from there, where you don't see the other person through stories, you don't see them through what you are or what you want the other person to be to you. And I think, yeah, that was what I was very much missing.
yeah, something you just brought up there. Something that I noticed when I would interact with people was that people really weren't listening to me, right? I would speak to them and I could see that they were somewhere else. Like their eyes just had a kind of a glaze over them. And they were deep in thought, thinking about other things, actually not seeing me or hearing me. And I was always like, I feel invisible. I really feel invisible.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, I kind of feel sorry for any kid feeling that and going through that and kind of just not really understanding what's going on in the world. Yeah. So maybe we can talk about your process then and like when did spirituality then start to raise its head in you?
Right. That would have been somewhere at the age of 19. And at that time, I was already suffering quite deeply. The teenage years were kind of horrendous for me. And also I did have a tragedy in my family. My mother, she had a very difficult disease that was diagnosed when I was, I think, 14, multiple sclerosis. And the disease in itself lasted probably like 2 decades. And that started to affect me, of course, strongly, even though I wasn't aware about it at that time. All that stress in my family and how much attention my mother's disease, of course, it was taking within the family. So I kind of, I guess, felt energetically even more than invisible, and just kind of kind of just lost somehow somewhere. And yeah, so I was about 19, and I was really going through this type of existential angst, like very, very intense suffering. I had a lot of thoughts about death and dying. And I ended up having a car accident. Like I was just so much in this thought, in this state. I think I even said that morning, like, that I want to die. And then I was walking past the street and a car would come and hit me. And my leg was broken. So I was in the hospital for quite some time because the healing had some complications. And then when I was there was a little library in the hospital, and there was a little book about, I don't exactly remember what it was, something about the oriental wisdom of enlightenment, yoga, meditation, self-realization, but just like small quotes, something like that, maybe some sutras. And I would just read some of it and be like, it was somehow touching me. I was like, something in me was like responding to that. And I say to myself, when I get out of the hospital, I'll try to find more about whatever this book is speaking about.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, it seems like a divine intervention, right? Although it came in the form of a car accident, but to get you to find the book, it's almost like the universe steps in and says, "Okay, we need to change the course of your life somehow." Sometimes it can be dramatic, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's how it all started. And then I ended up having almost, I think, 10 years of journey of spirituality, like being a seeker, being really involved in different type of practices, and yeah, it didn't really get me anywhere. So I was part of a little bit dogmatic organization like during that
Okay.
time, and I was doing a lot of practice, a lot of meditation, and well, studying, all of that stuff. And there was something about it that was just never actually going anywhere. Okay. So at the age of 30, I finally decided to leave all of that behind. I had a major just life change. And I went to a trip to US, I went to Hawaii, went to California, and something about that trip just brought some new energy, inspiration to my life. So I think I was a little bit like disillusioned at that point to any kind of practice type of approach. And I was pretty disillusioned with teachers. I was disillusioned with communities. Like I saw a lot of distortions and
Mhm.
weird stuff happening during that decade that I spent in that particular organization. So when I left, I was kind of like, okay, I'm just going to figure this out on my own. Like for the first time in my life, I'm not going to listen what anyone else says about this thing, but I'm just gonna find my own way with this. And I did some retreats on my own in Hawaii, which I wasn't even practicing that much, but I did them with this intention of just wanting to be with myself, wanting to be fully present in my experience, and kind of really tapping into like that longing that had been there and that hadn't yet found any real fulfillment. And in one of those retreats, I then had my first non-dual breakthrough. And it was I guess it was a classical Kundalini awakening, you could say. So the energy was suddenly moving through the central channel, which I never felt before.
Wow.
Actually, first everything got super, super contracted. Now I remember. So it was first, there was tremendous fear and anxiety. It was almost like existential terror, but it passed kind of very quickly through. And then the central channel opened and the energy was just moving through. And
Was there any attention put on Kundalini? Like, was it a Kundalini workshop, or was it just like a meditation
well, I was
retreat?
working with a mantra at that time. I had been meditating within the Hindu tradition, all those years. And yeah, so that might have influenced it, that I was
Okay.
kind of doing this type of what they call like deity practice, like
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
identification and meditation and with that specific type of energy. So
They can generate Shakti in people's systems as well, the mantras. Yeah.
but it was very powerful at that time. It was such a relief because for momentarily, like all sense of separation, very energetically, it was like completely gone. And it was just like almost like these waves of grace. They were just like pouring and pouring from within. They was just like pour and pour and pour. And I would be just like crying and crying and crying. And just looking around me, I would just see that everything is just kind of this energetic, vibrating field of my own awareness, and I was just, yeah, it's just at that time, it felt like such a deep homecoming, but it was just barely the beginning, barely the glimpse of the, yeah,
And did the
of that.
facilitators have any inclination what was going on for you, or did you tell them or ask?
No, at that time, I
Okay.
didn't really have any teachers around me. And actually, this particular opening that I had, it was like how could I even talk about to anyone about it? It was so strange to me. I was like, how could I ever even have words for it? Like I could kind of recognize that, oh, I've been reading Spanda Karika, and I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what they talk about here, but experientially it's just nothing what the mind could fathom. And like what could I say? Like there's just nothing to say, basically. I think I talked to it once to my best friend at the time, but other than that, I never mentioned to anyone anything about it because for some reason it just didn't even come to my mind. And at that time I was still staying staying far away from spiritual teachers, and this experience somehow confirmed to me at that time that
Yeah.
I gotta trust my own intuition with this. And Yeah.
And perception wise, did anything change with that Kundalini awakening?
I would say, yeah, it initiated a transformation, but slowly. So because after that, the sense of being a person would, of course, come back. Like that type of opening at that time, it lasted maybe like a couple of hours or something,
Mm.
and slowly, the sense of being a person would come back, but something would be very different from that moment onwards in my life. It almost felt like that energy kind of entered to the foundations of my life, and kind of started to slowly loosen them up. And it really entered like in my system, and I could, in a way, it's always been there ever since, even when apparently there's nothing happening, because it is our life force fundamentally. So something about it has always been there underneath this, you could say, the surface level of reality, where so when my sense of identity was still there, you could say at this surface level where you experience yourself being thoughts and person and memories and a life history. So even then, the depths are always there. But then it kind of feels like that we sometimes open from the surface into the depths, okay? And then we kind of remind ourselves like, oh, that's what I actually am. And then we return back, okay? But the home base is still there, you could say, on the surface. And at some point, it's just gonna shift so thoroughly, like that the identity is just it's just the depths and it's not identity in any normal sense of the word anymore. But then I can kind of look back to my experience at that time, but I'm more experiencing it from the depths, so I can kind of look into that being a person, which is a kind of a little
Yeah.
window to the world of the human beings. Oh, that's how it was. But at that time, it was the opposite around. I was apparently the person who was looking into the depths. Does that make any
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, you explain it very similar to me. I kind of feel like I fell in a well and my life was, if I looked up, there was like a little light up there, and that's where the world was. That's where the person was. And I would have to kind of come up and poke my head up and interact, and then I would always fall back into the well, into the stillness and the silence. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. So would you say that was like baseline, what they would call self-realization? Had that unfolded? No.
It was just an opening, so nothing yet shifted fundamentally at the identity level. So, like
Okay.
I said, I would still be experiencing myself as a person, but now I would have quote unquote access to these depths. So there would be more experiences, more glimpses, more openings that it would kind of reveal itself or open itself up. And at that time, I would call it unity consciousness, but it wouldn't be abiding. It would always be a state, and then it would return back into that sense of being a person. But simultaneously at that time, I started to experience slowly a kind of very intense states of depression that I couldn't really understand, like a really devastating sense of like falling into the depths of some sort of emptiness, and I was really fighting against it very strongly at that time. So after this first opening, I had a period of about 3 years like that, and there was glimpses, openings, and at the surface level, I was still being this person, and I felt my life had opened up into this incredible dimension that now I'm on this journey of self-realization, and it's going to culminate into a moment when this will become, permanent. this thing that I had so far glimpsed only as experiences. But there were also these really powerful kind of drops into like existential, yeah, just kind of hopelessness and meaninglessness, but they wouldn't last long at that time, maybe just a week or two, and then I would be back. But it was kind of this type of intense roller coaster for about 3 years, and then everything just kind of like fell into the dark night, because that depression was all the time. Actually, it was a kind of beginning of a type of dark night. And yeah, that then kind of initiated a whole new period in my journey, which lasted about 4 years. This very, very difficult dark night. When something fundamentally different happened in the journey, I felt like until that moment I had been in a mode of kind of looking outwards. Like even after I had this profound non-dual opening, I was still in this mode where I would look outwards. I would be going somewhere. I would experience myself, in this way that I'm moving, having a
So you were still seeing yourself as a person, where you were
yeah,
still identified with the ego and the mind. But yeah, it's very, it's fascinating because everybody I speak to has a totally unique process of how it unfolds. Yours is fascinating for me. That you were actually witnessing unity consciousness before even self-realization.
yeah. And that's what makes the dark night really super intense for me, because I had kind of glimpsed into the heaven, so many times. And suddenly all of that was gone when this very profound inward movement of consciousness have happened. So how the dark night felt for me is like that all of my life was like wiped out, even externally. I just kind of everything just fell apart for me. Everything that I had kind of thought at that point, that what my life was about and where it was going relationship wise, and like many, many things happened simultaneously, and it just kind of collapsed. My life collapsed. Okay. And after
Yeah.
that, I just fell into this period of just nothing is happening, nothing is going anywhere. And it was some sort of beginning of this dying process then, because after that, I have never ever been able to go back. And something inside of me knew already at that time that I can never go back to the dream, so to speak. So I had this final moment. I even remember it. I was in Hawaii and I was with my partner at the time, and we went to see a sunset. And I had this really surreal feeling when we were walking there on the beach that this is it. This is how far the dream goes. And something inside of me was like, but no, this is just the beginning. Like I'm just about to get started. And but it was like very clear, like, no, this is it. This was the end of the dream. Something like that.
Wow.
And it's true, that was as far as the dream went for me. So
And
yeah.
what did that look like or feel like? What was the experience of the dream ending?
Well, the Dark Knight was the next phase, and but it definitely didn't feel like, necessarily even Dark Knight or anything to do with awakening. It felt like the loss of the awakening that I have had before, because I couldn't anymore access those non-dual experiences and unity consciousness. Instead, I was just kind of starting to feel more and more and more that what the egoic identity actually is. And I was in this place where I couldn't anymore distract myself. I couldn't
Mm,
anymore use the spirituality to go
yeah.
for these powerful experiences. And even externally, I wasn't anymore moving around and traveling and all of that stuff. I was just kind of forced to just be still with my experience and really face these type of core issues of the egoic wounding and identification and traumas. But when it was happening, I didn't understand it was happening. I just all the time felt like my life had ended, but here I am, and I'm just experiencing this type of almost like a nightmare, and I don't know what to do. And I was doing some therapeutic work at that time, but it was very clear that something about that could not address like the most deepest sense of shattering that I was actually processing, because there was something about it that it felt like my sense of identity was in some way just shattered, but there was enough of that life energy, you could say, of the egoic identity still in the system, in the conditionings, in the traumas. So how I like to talk about it now, and I heard this from Christian mysticism, this metaphor is like when you have a tree, okay, and then the tree falls or it's being cut, then for quite a while the sap can still run in the trunk. So I
Mm.
think that's very descriptive how it can feel like. So you kind of get the death wound, so to speak, and you start dying, but you're still not like dead, because there's enough of that old energy still alive in the system.
Yeah, I think my metaphor is not as pretty. I used to say it was kind of like as a kid when you would cycle your bike, and as a boy I used to like jump off my bike and let my bike continue on down the road with nobody cycling it. And it kind of felt the same, like there was still energy there and it was still moving along, but eventually it was going to come down because there was, yeah, you'd jumped off earlier. Also, I noticed that the mechanism that kept all of the the traumas pushed down with awakening, that seemed to vanish, and then everything sort of comes up for people, right? Like people, when they hear unity consciousness, they think about oneness and connectedness, but it's an opening to everything as it is, the good and the bad. So I think for some people, I think they get to feel a lot of suffering that has somehow been kept down by a mechanism. Do you feel that's what happened in a way?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what happened. Like I started to really be, for the first time, directly in touch with the suffering in the body in a very physical manner. And yeah, that wasn't what I was expecting, you know,
Yeah,
because
it's not like it's new suffering, right? It's suffering that's always been there.
the suffering has always been there, yeah, but somehow we have managed to avoid it. And then we think the awakening is, at least when I was young and I had my first opening, it's just, oh, it's just going to magically, fix it, or I'm just going to magically shift to this other mode of being. And no, of course, it's not going to happen like that. It's, yeah, the awakening, initial awakening, it gave me a taste, it gave me a foretaste of what it, you could say, will be. Of course, it's just a very, very faint, even compared to what would come later. But there would be this process of many, many, many years of then actually turning towards the pain, actually starting to face the suffering, like the real work in a way started for me.
So what was that? How did you deal with that what was coming up?
So I was kicking and screaming and fighting against it, but I had no choice. So I was back in Finland at that time, and I didn't have like a lot of things going on in my life. The few people that were my friends, they couldn't really relate to this type of process. Anyone who was into spirituality in my life definitely couldn't relate to this, because this wasn't very, pretty thing to look at. It looks like kind of like depression from outside. It looks like angst, but there's something about it that is not just depression. It's not just, yeah, like clinical depression. And actually
Yeah.
now that I work with people, I can recognize when someone else is going through something like this versus just having like never, yeah, you would say just
I
simple
think
logical
I
depression.
Yeah, I think the soul is in dejection. I think it's just kind of realizes that it's never going to find lasting happiness in the outside world, in relationships, or in the job or the career, and it just hits a brick wall, right? And it's just like, okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely some sort of very mysterious transformational process that takes place there.
Yeah, and did you do like therapy or any sort of like shadow work or trauma?
I did therapy, I did shadow work, and it would help to a certain extent to address these human aspects of the suffering, like attachment traumas or things that I could communicate about. But there was this other part of it, which was that I had this non-dual opening and this unity consciousness, and I knew that it was just so much more real than anything I have experienced in my life. Even calling it unity consciousness doesn't really cover, but it
Yeah.
and I could never explain this to other people that, like, I can't pretend, that that was it. I knew it was the most meaningful thing that ever happened to me, but now I'm supposedly just back to being like this person, and there's something just super weird about it, and I can't comprehend like what has happened here.
And what about the Kundalini? Was the Kundalini still moving through your system at this stage, or had it
At
finished, or
this
what was going?
stage, it went like so quiet and still. Yeah, it just went totally silent in my system. Like in the middle of this dark night, which lasted 4 years, very interestingly, I did have a very powerful, again, Kundalini experience, which was somehow like a lot more clearer even than the initial opening that I had, because now there was like no visions at all. But it was again this like a very explosive energy that just like rush through the system. That first there would be this suddenly extreme contractedness and fear and terror and like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And then the energy would just surge through, and then just like total nothingness, just total nothingness, but just absolute peace, like from absolute terror and panic to just peace beyond comprehension and just total rest, this total perfection, like no thoughts, no nothing, but like incredibly just beautiful nothingness. And then this kind of recognition that like it recognizes itself is the most beautiful, just void nature, like and it's such a deep homecoming somehow.
I
And
took,
somehow very physical for me. Like when
yeah.
people talk about this gut level awakening, that's how it feels for me when that energetic sense of self it lets go. That's why it's so hard to talk about. It's just like you feel it with your whole being, the void, like you feel it with your whole body. It just like there's nothing more fulfilling.
Okay, you just mentioned awakening on the gut level. So I've interviewed a few people, head, heart, and the gut. Had you noticed the awakening at the different centers, the head and the heart?
Yeah. So interestingly, so that was in the middle of the dark night when I had this type of opening, which I guess is some sort of gut level opening. And the first awakening opening, I would say, was also there was some gut level just energetic release, but it was also tremendous like heart opening, the unity
Yeah,
consciousness
yeah.
and all that radiance, and everything is consciousness, everything is pure energy. But when you don't yet have this kind of head level awakening or that clarity, it's like you don't even have the kind of capacity to even recognize these other awakenings, what they actually are. So what my dark night culminated into was then finally this type of head level clear seeing, which wasn't at all spectacular. So it was very different from these other awakenings. It did not really have much any experiential byproducts. But what made it actually extremely profound is that it was finally abiding. It was just, that's how it's always been. There was some sort of clarity that again recognized itself, and it's just always been the case ever since. And then because of that, then there can also be a whole different deepening to these other awakenings.
It's really fascinating because I notice that men and women seem to awaken differently. Women generally awaken through the heart center first, which is the opposite of men, which is for the males, it's usually the head awakening first, or the yeah, waking up through their perceptions. And that's how it was for me. For me, it was awakening through my perceptions. I had the self-realization, and then awareness, whoom, dropped down into the heart, had the heart opening. So I went head, heart, gut. And yours was heart, gut,
But
head. Okay, okay. Yeah, fascinating.
yeah, it's fascinating. It can be so unique to each and everyone's, and then it can have also these endless cycles of deepening. So right, it's one of the awakenings, the head, heart, and gut. Yeah.
Head, heart, and the gut. And like the head and the heart is very clear for me what they are. But the gut, is the gut what you would call like non-existence, that kind of, you really feel it as a contraction.
The most difficult to describe, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like the identity in some sort of very primal form when it's almost like just this sense of like grasping on existence, but it can also
yeah.
grasp on non-existence actually. So it's just this impulse to hold on, I guess, but energetically speaking. And it's also like the structure of experiencing in itself. So when that dissolves, it literally then feels like dying. It feels like dying. So because then there is experience, but without the experiencer. And first, it can feel like non-existence, and I think that's a phase of awakening. I actually had it later on. It would last like at least a year, just this kind of drop into total nothingness, just like totally immersive nature. Maybe that's the God level awakening, immersion in that type of way. Yeah, it's kind of like you tap into this groundless, baseless nature of reality in a very, very like visceral and physical manner. So it's very physical like that, but also it's very clear that there's no actual physicality because there's no solidity to anything, there's no substance to anything whatsoever. It's just totally baseless like that, the experience, and there's no center. also. So I don't know, the center is very interesting. I don't really understand it completely myself, what the center is, but somehow it seems to be energetically in the heart and in the
Yeah,
guts. So
yeah.
so when that kind of psychic energy completely unwind itself, then it's that you can't really imagine that type of way of experiencing, that there's literally no center. Like the closest that I can describe it is a little bit like in deep sleep, right? There's no center whatsoever, right? It's just total void. So that's how it is for me in the waking mode or in the dreaming mode. So the deep sleep becomes kind of like present all the time, and this distinction between deep sleep and dreaming and waking, it kind of dissolves into this type of timeless eternity.
Yeah, I love how you describe it. Really, yeah. And the center, I kind of describe that as like the I thought. It's like a condensed false sense of meanness, right? That, and I remember how it used to feel, right? If somebody insulted me, it would be like somebody driving a knife into my heart, and it would hit something. There was something there that was solid. And then when I had the awakening, I called it Sahaja Samadhi. It was like effortless samadhi just started to kind of know itself. Just one day I woke up and it was like, oh, I'm just constantly in samadhi. But it was almost like something at the very center of what I was no longer there. I felt like the barn doors were now open and the wind could just blow right through and not hit anything. And I would notice like, I'd be around someone who might say something, a little insulting. And I'd go, oh, maybe a year ago, if they said that, I remember, that would hit me right in the heart. It was gone. It just wasn't there anymore. So it's like the nucleus and the edges at the same time fall away. It's like the unity consciousness to me felt like the edges of what I was disappeared, and then the center was like the nucleus just disappeared, and it was just I don't know. It's quite difficult to explain.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's what you described, that there's kind of like just emptiness where there used to be someone, and that
Yeah,
emptiness we almost felt like, yeah, this Sahaja Nirvikalpa Samadhi, because it's just at the core of any experience. And it has this amazing, like, seamless quality then to it, because there's not anymore that sense of someone kind of contracting against
yeah,
or contracting inward. So it becomes very like fluid, I guess, just the
yeah,
experience, but also it's just nothing. Like it's very clear that nothing is really happening, but at the same time there is this, aliveness and richness and kind of fullness to it. For me, I remember the first thing when I had this gut level opening happening, which was so hard to again describe at that time because I
yeah,
didn't yet have the head awakening, but it felt to me like I remember I even said it at that time to someone, that it feels weird that my movement is not anymore, that I'm not moved by a sense of lack. So that's the closest that I could put it in verse. Like I feel like whatever I'm doing, my movements, that I'm not really even moving, I'm not actually doing anything. So everything is just kind of moving, but something that had been moving me before, and it was just this sense of lack, something is missing, something is not here. And then there had been this very like physically felt like sense of contractedness around it, and this whole struggle of searching, which wasn't just at the level of mind. It was had been very physical experience. So then when that wasn't there, I was like very, I'm not moved by lack anymore, because there
yeah,
is this strange empty fullness, which is kind of not moving. It's never moving. There's this absolute stillness, but at the same time, there's constant movement. And the body is, doing things and actually doesn't need a doer to do stuff. It can just totally function without that very physically felt sense of doership. And actually everything else could also happen totally fine, thinking and speaking and anything, without there being a sense of someone. Yeah, it's a kind of a struggle, that whole doership thing. So it was such a relief when that went away.
Yeah, totally. You also mentioned Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Was that something that started to come into your experience? For me, it was like I went through a period of samadhi coming from me before the awakening in the gut. Did that happen? Like actually being pulled into the samadhi states.
That happened a bit later on my journey. So now I think I told my story until the point when the dark night kind of culminated in the head level awakening.
Yeah.
And then from there, 2 years forward, I had this then but I have still no words for it. Maybe I can try to describe it in a moment. And that was 3 years ago. And after that, it was like the end of something, like definite end of something, like that seeking energy that I was talking about, that primal longing. Like it's just gone. And but it was also a beginning of something. There was a definite sense of like being born, okay, even it's a kind of death. So so it's a weird paradox like that.
Yeah.
And after that, this Sahasha Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I read about it, I think, from Ramana. And that was one of the first descriptions that I could find, maybe 1 year till this happened to me, that, oh, this describes this very, very well. Like it was very hard for me to find from the whole of spirituality
Yeah.
anything, any kind of anyone almost that would describe this, because when the big shift happened for me, and even calling it big shift, it sounds a bit too traumatic because it's really not like that at all. It's very hard to say what it is,
I
but
call it the Great Awakening. It's like it kind of feels like the big one, right? It
yeah,
does.
yeah. There's
Yeah.
like awakenings, and then there's like
Yes.
awakening with
Yes.
a capital A or something, and
Yeah.
it was that. But again, there's no person or anyone to whom it happened, so it's kind of hard to talk about it. But yeah, I also Nisargadatta, I it was starting to I found him. He was like one of the first people who I would find who talk about that, oh, that this absolute is prior to I am. And that was very corresponding to my experience, because when I had the big shift, it was exactly that
Yeah.
pure, just consciousness in itself. Like even that just, gone, like any kind of self, any kind of experiencer. And with that dissolved this whole structure of experiencing itself. And that was what I couldn't find from the whole spirituality. Like there was just no sense of I at all. Like no sense of I at all. Before there had still been some sort of I
Yeah.
sense, like throughout the awakening, it had just identified in a much more liberating manner, like in a much more transparent manner and infinite manner and non-substantial manner. But this was very, very different because that whole paradigm collapsed, like the paradigm of identity.
I
Yeah.
would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Even for me, the self-realization, it's like awareness becomes aware of itself, right? It disconnects from the ego, but there's still an I at the center somehow, right? There's still an I at the center. Even in unity consciousness, I felt that the edges came down, but there was still the center. There was still a nucleus at the center that was going, oh, I'm one with everything. I see, it's like there's still an I, but in what I refer to as Brahman, right? It's like there's a death. The I dies. It's gone. The center falls away.
Yes, yeah. And it's like for me there was like these very like universal waves of grief that the whole thing happened with. It was
Yeah,
like a very, very deep dying process. There was also a lot of bliss. Like it's like you die into a bliss, but it's not bliss in a way that people think about it. It's not
yeah,
the same kind of bliss that in unity consciousness is. It's just this
yeah,
kind of deepest homecoming, but there's also terror. There's so much just pure fear. Like everything is so unfiltered, and there's just no landing ground. There's no reference points, and everything is just this pure formlessness. Like you really start to live this pure formlessness and boundlessness in a kind of interesting way, because I think you can have a non-dual shift, which sometimes is called unity consciousness, where there is this totally boundless sense
yeah.
perception and no division whatsoever, and you kind of see yourself in everything, or it's even like I am everything, like the grand self. But there's something about it when that I sense, it just because it's kind of like when I saw it for what it was, actually, I had this very definite moment after this thing happened to me that I kind of tried to look like, what was it? What was the I that is not here anymore? And I was like, it's just a thought. That's all it ever was. But with it goes like everything, because it's almost like the whole world and everything what you thought your life was. And it's just an extension of that one thought that I am, I exist. It's almost like a thought in the mind of God or something like that.
Yeah.
Or you call it Brahman, you know? And so when that goes, everything goes, and just everything kind of resolves into this pure potentiality kind of.
Yeah, we say it's just a thought, but it feels so real, doesn't it? Like it feels like it's a knot. It's like I actually seen it as a little entity. My awareness dropped into my heart space and I saw protruding out of the top of my heart this little, like a whack-a-mole. You know that game where the little whack-a-mole pops its head up and you hit it with the hammer? It was like this little entity was like looking up out of the top of my heart, and I somehow knew that the conduit that went from my heart space up into my intellect had been severed. And now this little individual entity was sat there with nowhere to go. It couldn't get back up into my intellect, and it just fell back into the heart and it dissolved. And I don't know, like when I seen that, was that the process of it dying or had it happened prior to that? But that's how it was shown to me, that it did feel like it had its own individual consciousness, or its own little kind of life, and it
Yeah,
wanted to stay there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it kind of felt like it was connected also, like a lot of, you could say, simultaneous dreams. Like I wouldn't even call them past lives, and I don't like have myself like clear memories a lot from those. I have some glimpses, but they more
Yeah.
feel like simultaneous dreams, like these kind of spots of lights. And 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 then when there's like this fine tether that links us into existence, like that, when the I thought is still there, and that I thought links to all the other I thoughts. So when that kind of tether is severed, like it's kind of like cut, then it's like
Yeah.
you're in emptiness. This is shunyata. So and it's just amazing, because now you're outside the dream. You realize that
Yes.
it's like, wow. And there's no way to explain how that is like.
Yeah, so I felt like I was simultaneously in the dream and outside of the dream at the same time, almost watching me in my life from like Shiva. Shiva was outside of creation, looking in on me and my life. Yeah,
That's how it was for me too.
yeah,
Like, yeah, the first phase was very much like that, very Shivaic like that. I felt, like you say, like I'm in the dream and I'm out the dream simultaneously.
yeah,
And there was even this description that I some read from back in the days from the yogic scriptures, which was called Shambhavi Mudra, that's kind of the gesture of Shiva, that he's constantly visualizing this stream of existence and kind of being immersed in it, but at the same time he's kind of outside of it and just holding the vision like that all the time there.
yeah.
And it was like, wow, that's what this whole world is. The whole I am. It's just this ridiculous kind of like image of light, kind of. This is
Yeah,
just a metaphor, of course, but
Yeah, it's a metaphor, but it makes a lot of sense. And so for me, it happened. I had the experience of Brahman first, like that they've been sucked into the non-existence, but yet there was still the I-ness. And then after the I-ness disappeared, I was sat meditating, and I all of a sudden I saw Shiva sat on the top of these snowy mountain tops. And then I heard the word, you and Shiva are now one. And when I came out of the meditation, I was like, what's happened? I could really feel that neutrality was like, samadhi. Everything was now just samadhi, always.
mm,
Yeah, fascinating conversation. I'm really enjoying this, Vivi.
me too.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So,
And I love it that we're kind of speaking about it in a kind of spontaneous way, not in this linear timeline, because for me right now, there is no linear timeline. So it all feels like you can just kind of tap into any moment in time, and they exist in a very
Yes.
non-linear manner.
Yeah, I have the very same experience. Like, and I think it's because I'm so used to speaking about it. It's like I can pop into all of them different bubbles that sort of exists. They still exist. I can still somehow tap into like Brahman and can be really in Brahman, or I can have the experience of unity or even self-realization. They still all exist for me to be able to access somehow. Not in linear though. It's like they're like Russian dolls all kind of nestled within one another.
Yeah, maybe like interpenetrating. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So after the non-existence or the Brahman stage, did you have that sort of like re-entering?
Re-entry into the humanness.
Did that? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I had. Yeah, that was very interesting also, because I like most of these phases I went on my own, and like at the later stages I did connect at some point with a teacher, but that particular teacher hadn't gone through these stages that we are talking about now. So in a way I ended up going them on my own anyways.
yeah.
And then I was in this state that we now talked about, this Shivaic or Brahmanic state. And as far as everything that I could find out about anyone, including Nisargadatta, and I was like, this is it. This is supposed to be it, you know? And I just had this like really just subtle nagging sense that like, no, like there's like further, and it
There's
doesn't
more.
make any sense. Like, how could there be further? Like, this is like kind of transcendence beyond transcendence or something like that. So the further actually was again something that the mind cannot comprehend it. So it's almost like this realization in itself, with the self-realization, and then this kind of Brahmanic vastness within, which is like even you could say further than that. It's a kind of like explosion, you know. It's kind of like a supernova. So it's that type of like that. So what's can happen then afterwards is a kind of implosion, you know. So it's almost like that infinite vastness, then it kind of contracts back into a human being, or it can feel kind of like that there's this re-entry into the
Re-entry. Re-entry for me,
and
yeah.
and in a way then it all just collapses. So then there is not anymore any kind of phases, and the humanness is not really, well, human in any sense that it used to be, but at the same time it is, you know.
Yeah.
And but what becomes now very, very clear, that this is all there is. Like, this is it. This is emptiness. There's no any emptiness apart from the cup. You know, emptiness is not some sort of background substance or source from within the manifestation arises. Like, this distinction between manifestation and source collapses, and then there is just manifestation, but it is source. Like, and it's not really manifesting because there's no actual arising, you know. So you kind of go beyond existence and non-existence in a way, and it's just this very ordinary human experience in a kind of very
Yeah. All
manner.
the phenomena. For me it was okay, so it was like as if I popped out of existence and I'm kind of like Brahman, half in reality, sort of witnessing myself from beyond. And then I was kind of stuck there for 2 years, and it really felt like I had broken the human. And I kind of had this really kind of sad sense that my life is never going to go back to the way it was. But then eventually it was almost like the soul then came back in. Like it came back in through this membrane. And when it came back in, it pulled in divinity with it. So it was like as if I was now filling with this shimmering light, this quality that was just, it felt like it was pouring constantly in through the top of my head, down into the cells of my body. I was now seeing that everything was made of this. And it's not like you're seeing it with your eyes, but it's like as if you just sense that there's this, how would I describe it? Like a platinum light that is somehow animating all of everything that you see and you're witnessing.
Mhm.
Did that happen? It was
Yeah, well, I call my websites sensing radiance. So
radiance.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
radiance.
Holiness or radiance. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you describe it very well. So like when I said, when I had the initial Kundalini awakening and opening, I said it was a kind of foretaste. So yeah, it was a very faint foretaste of what it is like, this type of, well, radiance, just kind of like empty radiance is
Yeah. Yeah.
how I like to call it sometimes, just experiencing itself. And yeah, it's really like a terrain of its own, like this re-entrance into the humanness, because for me there was then another wave of shadow that moved through, and it becomes very interesting because now it's actually possible to access certain of these root formations of the traumas and conditionings in a very
Yeah.
different way, because
Yeah.
there's not anymore that energy of identity like pushing and pulling. So it becomes almost like enjoyable at this point, all the shadow stuff, even though it can still be like uncomfortable for the system, sometimes like the resistance and so on.
Yeah, what I found was now that like you can use life, everything in life becomes a teacher, and it kind of becomes like, oh, an opportunity to find more shadow in myself. It's like, yeah, because it doesn't go away, even when you go into these later stages. There's always shadow that we can uncover in ourselves, but it becomes a sort of a game. It's like, oh, whereas before it felt really horrible, and you wanted to kind of like shy away from it. But now it's like, oh, there's some. I need to go in and find that and kind of transmute it into more radiance or more light.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you can kind of also sense how everything is so interconnected. So nothing is really personal.
Yeah,
There's kind of like, for example, generational trauma that we inherit, and yeah, so this kind of darkness can sometimes move through, and there is just this natural, what I sometimes call like self-liberating nature
yeah.
in the experience that is characteristic to this natural state, and no one is doing anything. So like it's kind of like I'm just not anymore there as a person, complicating the process. So this type of release and healing can sometimes happen spontaneously like that.
Do you feel that the divine descended down into you and is now working through you? You're almost like a puppet for the divine.
No, no, I don't really feel it like that. Even the terminology like divine, it's sometimes I use it because everything is kind of like pure divinity. I do like the word, but there's something about this whole thing that it's kind of like went beyond this God altogether, like all these terms like God or anything. So in that sense, it's just very, for me, that empty nature, like the kind of absence, which is also presence, that's more characteristic for this. There's a definite sense of some mysterious workings that it's happening like through the body mind, kind of like deeper intelligence that it's operating through the system. But that same deeper intelligence, I can recognize it like everywhere around me actually. So
Yeah,
it's operating through everyone in their own specific way. So there's no sense of specialness
yeah, yeah.
about this. Well, it's not even a state. It's really hard to, yeah, say what it's like.
Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I get it. For me, it was like phenomena ceased to exist. So all during my awakening, I was always very psychic. I would meditate. I would get visions. I don't know, somewhere around the re-entry, all of that just sort of collapsed. And I was like, well, why can't I access any information outside of myself? And I interviewed, I don't know if you came across Luciano and Al, I interviewed the two of them. They were researchers, and they'd done a lot of research in the later stages of awakening, and they coined this term omni integration. It was just like at the
Mm.
just everything kind of collapsed. Everything collapsed. Everything became really normal, really quiet, almost like you're just back as a really normal human being, but at the same time, different.
Yeah, that's really great way of putting it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Somehow different, because also for me there is this definite sense of completeness. So this, like I said, when in that Brahmanic state, there was still that kind of nagging sense that there's a bit further to it, and I don't know
yeah.
what it is. So when this re-entry happened, and just this, like everything we just discussed, something about it then finally came to this kind of, it's just completion, it's just pure completeness, but it's not an end, because it's
It's
constantly
not
like,
an end.
just being, and who knows what's going to happen next. And it's not arriving. It's kind of beyond the paradigm of leaving and arriving anywhere. But it's weird because it is very just normal, and kind
Yeah.
of in a way it's like the whole dream of separation and the whole dream of awakening kind of happened, but also didn't happen. And at the same time, there's no time. So it's hard to talk about. It's not
Yeah.
outside time, whatever this is.
And you're just back being really normal, really human. One of the things that I noticed was I now feel things way more than I used to. Like for when I was going through, especially the Brahman shift, it felt like, there was no suffering. I was kind of like outside witnessing what was going on. But now it's almost like I feel everything in the moment. It's not like my awareness goes to things that are like distant, but anything that arises, I feel it really deeply, like really it passes through me. And that wasn't the case for me. That just seems to be something that's turned up now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, there is definitely that sense of just feeling, yeah, just feeling everything. That can sometimes come for me more intensely, that I just almost like I feel everything so deeply, the environment, other
Yeah.
people, the world, kind of like, oh, all this suffering, and it's just like a heart opening and kind of like a
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. But sometimes it's more kind of just quiet, and I feel it's necessary also for the system that it's not all the time so open like that. So my system is somehow able to just apparently kind of close sometimes, and then it's more.
Yeah, I have that ability as well. The kind of I can shift into that Brahman state and be disconnected if I want to, but it doesn't seem to want to do that. It's like as if it's like it wants me to feel. It wants me to really be here and be human. And if there's suffering coming up, then I have to be with the suffering, or someone else's suffering. I have to feel that as it arises. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's beautiful. And really, it's all just here, and it's all just now, even though there's not really actual here and there's not actual now. But it kind of becomes clear that this is it, and there's nowhere to go other than further in, further and
yeah,
further in. And it's kind of like an endless fractal, like kind of movement in a way. And there's something about this. I like to call it the no trace quality. So all this, whatever has been realized with this self-realization and even beyond that, it's kind of always here, but it's
yeah.
not something that needs to be thought about. But something about it, it kind of moves through the experience and leaves no trace. And
Yeah.
while this human experience is then occurring.
Yeah, it's the sense I have is that consciousness has remembered itself almost as far as it can go, but then there's the beingness it's like the beingness can always move into greater states of love. That's the sense I have. It can just kind of my beingness can still evolve, but consciousness has sort of known itself back into the ocean.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you started working as a teacher. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started to do that when I had the big shift 3 years ago. It was actually like happening alongside the first retreat that I ever thought the shift. So it's interesting how it was very synchronistic. So I've been doing small retreats in Finland ever since, and then I started to do the one-on-one work, I think a year ago or something like that. Yeah, it's been all happening in a kind of lovely way on its own, and I enjoy doing it a lot. Even at the same time, it's just so unknowable, the whole functioning of everything. So to be in the position of suddenly talking about these things, it's just purely intuitive.
Yeah.
It's just what it does apparently. But of course, I'm learning all the time, and I think there's so much infinitely to learn and infinite space to be more mature with all of this. But yeah, it just seems to do certain things, move in
Yeah.
a certain way. And I'm like, wow, I'm always, I'm never bored because I never know what it's going to do until it's doing it. In reality, I never know what it's going to say until it's speaking. I'm like,
Yeah, you have a real natural gift at talking about the stages. It's really beautiful, real clearness. Yeah, so just for people who want to f follow you, YouTube channel, website, do you want to give me your I'll put links down below, but do you want to just name them?
So I have a website, it's called
Yeah,
sensingradiance.com.
.com. Yeah.
And my YouTube channel is in the making. So maybe I'll
Okay,
give you the
wonderful.
info, but I'm working on it right now to get it slowly going.
Wonderful. And I guess like if people they find your website, I'm sure they'll find your future YouTube channel. Any other handles or any social medias that you want people to follow you on?
No, no, that would be it.
Just a website. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Vivi, it's been an incredible conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Me too. I enjoyed it so much.
Is there anything I may
I
have left
know.
out? Is there anything you'd like to finish off on? Any messages? Anything you feel that we haven't covered? I mean, we've really gone through quite a bit in this one.
I think we had a really fun and spontaneous and profound
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, really enjoy it. Honestly,
It's so hard to cover everything always. It's such a we could always have endless amounts of conversation, and it would never still be anything other than kind of faint attempts to kind of like I feel like if there would be this infinite ocean and you kind of like faint attempts to kind of try to take some water there and then it's
yeah.
pouring from your fingers, but it's still something very beautiful and inspire. There's something about I enjoy about these attempts to trying to express the inexpressible.
Yeah, and I guess like there are people who are going like there's more and more people awakening into this non-existence or this Brahman and it's really because when I went through the awakening there was hardly anybody. I had nobody that I knew that had gone before me into this state. So I was like 2 years. So I mean, when you find a video where consciousness is talking to consciousness about non-existence and Brahman, it can be really beneficial for people to kind of understand the roadmap and where they
Yeah.
are on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Fabulous. Fabulous. Vivi, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the viewers and listeners. Take care. Bye bye.
This has been the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds. Garrett is a lifelong seeker of truth, a spiritual teacher and author, and it's his passion to delve into the profound world of consciousness. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, the podcast is available on YouTube and all the major podcasting platforms. Find us on Instagram at the_mother_force. Take care, and we'll see you soon on the Endless Possibilities Podcast.